Hello and thank you for listening to the Travis Talks Education Podcast. My name is Travis Smith. Welcome to episode 001. Today's episode is just a baseline knowledge introduction to both NCAA Academic Division I rules as well as the academic measurements that you often hear about in the media, or when you're talking about a 6-6 bowl team getting to go to the playoff based on their APR score, then that's probably where you've heard it. But I'm going to break down those academic rules and measurements just to give everyone an introduction. AdvisEdu is a think tank company focusing on how innovation in higher education impacts NCAA academic policy, as well as how membership institutions can fairly be monitored and assessed academically to ensure all student athletes are getting a quality educational experience. AdvisEdu looks to stay ahead of the game by participating in the overall innovation discussion and representing the voice and opinion of the NCAA academics in many different channels of communication, aka the podcast and the website advisedu.com. AdvisEdu produces white papers on various topics that impact intercollegiate athletics both today and tomorrow. So as I mentioned, today is just going to be a baseline introduction to the NCAA academic rules and measurements. I will first and foremost just get into the academic rules. So many people are actually unaware or misinformed of the NCAA's progress towards degree requirements. So this is just to serve as an outline of such policy, to provide the baseline knowledge and help you kind of navigate the podcast and the website. If you're an administrator at an NCAA Division I institution, though, I would like to let you know I am willing to do a simplified and personal explanation of these rules in person to your employees, your students, or your coaches. And if you want to do that, you can get on advisedu.com and go to my speaking page to learn more. So essentially, the NCAA academic rules kind of encompasses a handful of different objectives. Now, the biggest rules involve credit hour requirements, percentage of degree completion, cumulative GPA, being in good academic standing, full-time enrollment, degree applicability. I'll talk about the football and baseball specific rules as well as graduate students. And while this information is accurate, it is meant as an outline and not as a way to replace consulting with your institution's compliance officer. So if you do work at an institution, make sure you talk to your academic and or compliance individual if you have a question. Now, the general public can also download the entire NCAA manual by visiting www.ncaapublications.com. The academic requirements, just so you know, are under bylaw 14. So first I'm going to talk about credit hour requirements. Now, most schools use a credit hour system. If your institution does not, there are certain changes in the bylaws, and they do represent if you're on the quarter system. But for now, I'm just going to talk about the traditional 2-semester institution. So the NCAA requires semesterly and annual credit hour requirements as a way of maintaining a balance of full-time education throughout the year, meaning they don't want you to overdo it in one semester, get your eligibility healthy in one semester, and then when you're playing, you're just going to class or not going to class and not putting in the work. So we're trying to keep it a full-time balance throughout the school year, whether you're in season or not. For Division I institutions, you have to earn 6 degree credits in both semesters. And then in the academic year of those 2 semesters, you need to earn 18 degree credits. That's not including summer. And then freshmen must earn 24 degree credits prior to their sophomore year. But this also can include college credit received prior to enrollment or summer school prior to full-time enrollment. And with the rise of AP and dual credit classes that it seems like our freshman student athletes are coming in with, those can go into the 24-hour rule. But keep in mind the 6 and the 18-hour rules, that cannot be. So that's talking about the whole balance of the year to year. And then percentage of degree. Basically, after your first 2 years, you have to meet a 40% requirement going towards your goal major. So whatever degree you say you want and major you want to pursue, then you are going towards that. You're at 40%, and it's to keep you on track. Now, keep in mind, if you're at a public college, and then just college in general, we're on a 4-year plan, right? But as those of you that work in higher education or maybe went through it yourselves, a lot of students do not get out in 4 years. And with the NCAA giving you 10 semesters to play 4 seasons, they're on a 5-year plan. So if you're a redshirt student athlete or not, I mean, everyone's undergrad requirements are not as strict as you would think because it's really based on a 5-year program, as you'll hear. After your first year, I mentioned you had to have 24 credits. Now, if you think about it, in a 5-year plan on a 120 credit degree, you actually are keeping pace for 24 degree credits every year. So that's an easy way to look at it, right? Now, the things that get challenging is when you have changing your major or you took a lot of elective credits. So as an advisor, we're really conscious about this, about, really the midway through your sophomore year, you need to be close. And then that way you can project if you're going to need summer school or not. Here's the breakdown of the percentage. You must complete 40% of your degree prior to your 5th full-time term. So I'm going to use 120 credits as the percentage here. So 40% is 48 credits. So at the end of your sophomore year, entering your junior year, so you have that wiggle room with summer school, you have to be at 40%. Now, complete 60% of your degree prior to your 7th full-time term, which is 72 credits on the 120 credit program. And then complete 80% of your degree prior to your 9th full-time term. So going into that 5th year, if you haven't graduated in 4, you have to at least be at 96 credits if you're on a 120 credit program. This is typically not a big problem unless you are a junior college transfer or you change your major or you struggled with degree applicability. Before I get into the GPA, that kind of will segue into the degree applicable credits. So not all credits are created equal in the eye of the NCAA, meaning beginning with the 5th full-time term, so your junior year, all credits thereafter must be counting towards that degree. The purpose of degree applicability is to ensure students are making progress towards that degree, not just taking random classes, while also kind of making you force yourself into deciding on a major and then staying on track to graduate. Okay, so you have the first 2 years, really about 1.5 years to really focus on what you are interested in and what you want to do. But then you have to start making plans to finish that degree. So degree applicability, that also comes into play after your sophomore year with the credit hour requirements. So all of a sudden that 6 and that 18, that 24 every year really needs to be degree applicable. So if you're in a major like business that requires a lot of credit requirements, then you're not going to have a lot of electives to spare. So I'll have another episode where I kind of talk to you in my continuing eligibility piece, how that's all calculated. But essentially you just add up the gen ed core, you add up the major requirements, and then subtract that number from 120 or however many credits to graduate with your degree, then that's the amount of free electives you have. So you kind of have 3 different buckets. You have your gen ed core, your major, and your electives, which also includes minors and all those. And speaking about degree applicability, credit hour requirements, if you're in a minor, it can actually go towards the credit, the 6 and the 18, the 24, but it cannot count in the percentage. So in the percentage, a minor class actually has to be counted as one of those electives. Also, another rule is annual certification of GPA. So the NCAA requires student athletes to annually satisfy a certain cumulative GPA based on their number of full-time semesters. Keep in mind you can never round up, okay? Now this is, I'm going to use again as a model of a 2.0. So the rule says you can use any, whatever GPA is good enough for the institution to graduate in any major. So on most campuses, that's going to be a 2.0. So your cumulative GPA. So entering that 3rd full-time term, you must have 90% of the minimum cumulative GPA allowed to graduate. So on a 2.0, that is a 1.800 cumulative GPA going into your sophomore year. Going into your junior year, it is 95% of that minimum, which that bumps up to a 1.9. And then entering the rest of those terms, so the 7th and the 9th full-time terms thereafter, you had to have 100% of the minimum acceptable GPA to graduate. So a 2.0 cumulative if a 2.0 is the lowest that's required. Another thing is you must be in good academic standing. So that is kind of an institution policy. So if your institution's policy is if you're not in good academic standing and you're on probation, if they say, you're still allowed to compete in sports, then you can. But a lot of institutions, if you're on academic probation, you will not be eligible to compete based on the institutional policy. And then the final really blanket rule is full-time enrollment. So for an undergraduate student, that is typically 12 credits. That is a financial aid rule so that you can be awarded scholarships or other versions of financial aid, also to keep you on that track. And if you keep 12 every year or every semester, then you're on pace for a 5-year degree. But you'll notice most college athletes take 15 credits during the year. Also gives you that flexibility if you had to drop something, if your schedule's too demanding, and be a traditional college student where you can at least attempt 15 and give it a good college try. Now, football and baseball do have specific rules. Before I get into that, I'll talk about graduate students. Students that are competing with NCAA eligibility still left, they're still required to earn 6 credits each semester, but there is no cumulative GPA requirement, although with a graduate student, your grad schools typically have a 3.0 or 3.5 GPA before you're not in good academic standing, because you also must remain in good academic standing with your grad program, once again based on institutional policy, and be enrolled full-time, which most of the time is 9 credits, some it's 6, depending on the class and the degree in the program. So that is how graduate students are tracked. There's no percentage just because typically they've earned their undergraduate degree, so it is all good to go. And then football, so there's specific notes. Football is required actually in the fall, their championship season obviously, to earn 9 degree credits instead of just 6. And the reason being is there was academic problems. Anytime there's a sports-specific rule, the NCAA research team will kind of look at it, and then the Committee on Academics at the NCAA for Division I will look at policy changes that might need to happen. That's how they got to the point with football and football and baseball for some specifics. Now they're still held to the APR, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, of the 6 credit hour rule. But if you do not earn 9 credits, so say you earn 7 credits, so you earn the 6-hour rule but not the 9, all of a sudden you are suspended, facing a 4-game suspension at the beginning of the next year, okay? Now, there are ways to get away from this. So the penalty comes originally with 4-game suspension, but it can be reduced to 0 games once if the student earns a total of 27 degree credits before the next fall semester. And then also, obviously, you have to meet all the other academic rules. So that's including the fall. So say you earned 7 in the fall, you earned your 12 in the spring to meet the 18-hour rule. So you're at 19 credits. Then you had to do 8 credits of summer school to be able to meet that 27. So that's typically what's going to happen with summer school is it's going to be used to either get ahead on the degree or help with eligibility purposes. Same thing can happen in subsequent years where they fail the 9-hour rule, but then you can only get 2 games of that 4-game suspension back. So you only get that one opportunity to get all 4 games back. Then after that, it is only possible to get it down to a 2-game suspension, still have to earn the 27 hours. Then we talk about baseball. So in every sport, it's an annual certification. You can always use another term to get healthy, as they say, with your eligibility. Not the case in baseball. So in Division I baseball, you actually have to be eligible at all times. So entering the fall and the spring, and if not, you're not eligible for that championship season. So that is obviously a big deal. The big reason why I asked the NCAA research staff when I was in a meeting with them, and they told me, the Committee on Academics was looking at the data and saw there was a very weak performance from baseball student athletes, and using one semester to just tank pretty much and get healthy in the following semester. And that's a big deal for the end of the spring too, where a lot of schools can use summer school. But baseball, you have your conference championships and you have the College World Series right after usually the traditional spring semester. So it's really a year-round thing. And eligibility becomes a problem with baseball, as I'll talk about in future episodes, because a lot of Division I baseball players are transfers from either one or multiple institutions, and every time you transfer, you diminish your pace on graduation with your degree applicability, because you lose credits in the transfer process, or credits come in as electives and you run out of electives. Okay, so that is in a nutshell about 15 minutes worth of the academic rules. Now I'm going to wrap up today's episode just kind of talking about things that these academic measurements where we take into effect these rules that I just talked about. So there's two things. So it's called the Academic Performance Program, but the two essential items is the academic progress rate. APR gets a lot of conversation, and then the graduation success rate. The NCAA has their own graduation rate method. So those are the two things I'm going to talk to you about now. So as you'll notice when I talk about these, the NCAA's academic measurements really are not too different from state and federal higher ed policy. The NCAA has created academic standards to monitor performance of the student athletes and also to hold the NCAA institutions themselves accountable. So the APR is part of the culture change that happened in 2003 to reposition the commitment to academics for the NCAA. They created the APR then. It's meant to hold institutions accountable for academic progress through a team-based metric. So this isn't just an individual metric. The APR actually places a 1-point value for each athletic scholarship student-athlete on two areas for a total of 2 points each student. So the continuing eligibility piece that I just talked about moments ago, and then retention. So are you coming back and are you eligible? So those are the two biggest pieces. And what you do is every scholarship athlete gets their 2 possible points added up. So whatever they earned, it's then divided by the total points possible of everyone on the team, scholarship student athletes, and then multiplied by 1,000, and then as your 1-year APR score. The NCAA is constantly using the research team to evaluate what a strong number should be to best predict graduation. Right now, that number is also at 930 is considered a 50% real-time graduation rate. And this is what's used to tie access to championships, as well as break the tie, I guess you can say, of bowl availability for football. So right now, here's how it goes. Currently, teams must earn a 930 4-year average APR score or a 940 average APR score over the most recent 2 years. And then teams that fall below that standard are required to submit a thorough APR improvement plan. So that is breaking down everything you're doing. Who are you recruiting? What support services do you have in line? And then they compare it to the institution's student bodies to see if there's any holes in your academic support or your recruiting philosophy. And then you turn that in, you use academic officials on campus, and then you submit that to the NCAA. I've been part of an APR improvement plan, helped author it. Didn't have to use it because we didn't fall under the score, but it is a real problem for institutions to face because you have to get a lot of people involved, and you might have to make some very substantial recruiting changes. And then the NCAA is actually criticized for supposedly touting this measurement as an academic success tool, but in reality, it's just meant to be a better snapshot of progressing towards an actual degree in lieu of the delayed measurement of graduation rates. So the APR was actually created as a timely graduation rate. It's a predictor, so it's not perfect. It's not saying, hey, all these students have A's, but it is more along the lines of saying they're continuing in their program, they're progressing towards that degree, and they're coming back. And so in higher education, we focus on those two areas of progress and retention. So no one's trying to say, oh, hey, when we celebrate 1,000 APR score, that's not saying everyone on the team is getting a great education necessarily, or they're all straight A students. But, we don't hold that up as, what the institution's expected of. Everyone's going to be different academically, but this is just to show they're at least progressing towards that ultimate prize of a degree. And what's interesting is you can actually access the APR database on their website, ncaa.org, or you can go to advisedu.com and look at my academic rules page. I actually have it linked up there where you can click and go to the database. You can search and look up every school in Division I's APR. And kind of moving on is graduation success rate. So this one will have its own episode in the future, I'm sure, talking about comparing graduation rates. So right now, the NCAA Division I membership created their own graduation methodology in 2002 as part of that culture change. And it's on athletic financial aid out of a frustration of inaccuracies in the federal graduation rate is why it was created. So the NCAA Division I membership did create their own graduation method in 2002 for student athletes that are on athletic financial aid, similar to APR, but this is based out of the frustration of the inaccuracies of the federal graduation rate. If you ask anyone in higher education, they'll tell you that the FGR method that the government uses is outdated, and it drops a lot of people because it doesn't require tracking transfer student athletes. And so it's an institution-centered method, which is good, but college students transfer quite often, as we've definitely student athletes, it's come up this year, I'm sure, quite a bit. So unlike the FGR, the GSR, the graduation success rate, actually moves the transfers that are in good academic standing from one school's cohort or their rating to another's, instead of just automatically considering that student to be an academic failure for the institution and then punishing the institution. So essentially, if you have a 2.6 GPA and you transfer away, you're considering good academic standing for the graduation success rate, and that school will be kind of off the hook as far as the retention and losing them, because they at least did their job where they were eligible, they were coming back regularly until they decided to leave. But if they would have stayed there, they would have still been eligible. So the NCAA is actually often criticized for using their own graduation method, the GSR, because it's not comparable to the general student body. So I guess if there's a bad policy that we're using in higher ed, people are going to criticize the NCAA for trying to be forward-thinking enough to change it. But what's interesting is the biggest criticism is you can't compare it to general students, but the NCAA actually still publishes the FGR too, so the federal graduation rate and the GSR of the student athletes. So there's still a comparison tool there, and in fact, similar to the APR database, the NCAA has a database open to the public that allows a user to search any school in Division I's FGR and their GSR. You can even break it down by sport, so there's that feature as well. I linked that up on my website as well. If you want to find it on the AdvisEdu.com, you can access the graduation database link, or just go to ncaa.org and look up graduation rates. Very interesting information. The transparency with the NCAA is quite impressive. That is just a 20-minute tutorial on the academic rules and the academic measurements that the rules kind of go into. So that all feeds into the system of continuing eligibility, progress towards degree, which will be another focal point of an upcoming episode on the Travis Talks Education podcast. If you are a leader for an athletic department or an institution and you would like these rules explained, at your institution or via webcam or telephone, I am definitely capable of having that conversation with you. If you want to reach out on advisedu.com/contact, and we can talk about that. Visit the website advisedu.com to keep up to date with the projects I'm working on and follow along with the book. If you want to join the discussion with me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is @TravisHigherEd, and we'll definitely have a conversation on there, constantly talking about higher education innovation and the NCAA academics. Thank you for listening to the Travis Talks Education podcast, and we'll speak soon.